Well, we're at this point now where it's February and the Brexit talks or negotiations are ready to start almost pretty much in earnest now. And we get to a point where we're looking at what's going to be the tone of these negotiations, what could be our negotiating position, things like that. And as we start to hear these things, the government already has taken a very aggressive tone. And we're going to go over this New Statesman's piece because I completely agree and have said in the past, I think the government and most of these Brexiteers themselves, which we're going to go over either this week or next week, are preparing for failure. They know full well the costs of Brexit. They just don't have the nerve to actually tell people Brexit's a bad idea. So after all this time of building people up to the wonders of Brexit, you now have a situation where they've realised, oh no, we've built people up too much. We've got to have a come down. And you're already seeing this. Businesses, farmers, fishermen, all angry about the promises that they were made aren't coming true. And if this is stuff for businesses, sooner or later this will trickle down. It's inevitable. And remember, if businesses start to pull away, that means that other things will start to happen as well. We are already seeing this as fact. Businesses are starting to move out of the UK to Europe to avoid Brexit. And yeah, this is just, and we haven't really, we started to feel the effects of Brexit now, but I still think that it's good money to put a bet on the transition period being extended. So, on to the article then. So, Downing Street's Brexit tweets are about preparing for failure. The government has adopted a new belligerent tone on Twitter, and the audience is domestic, not foreign. The Brexit talks are about a lot of things, but one of the things they aren't about is what is fair or not. That is true for trade talks in general. The bigger bloc sets most of the terms, and the smaller one largely ends up with a take it or leave it offer. That's the essential truth. That means that the first generation of Eurosceptics, from Peter Lilly to the Conservative side to Jeremy Corbyn on the Labour side, opposed not only membership of the European Union and its customs union, but also the TTIP and the mooted US trade deal. The choice in the Brexit talks, and indeed in free trade agreements in general, is fundamentally about the level of freedom that you're willing to give away in order to secure greater level of access to markets. And as I've said multiple times, again, I don't understand why Brexiteers make this big fuss about, quote, having sovereignty, when in the EU we are members, we have people in the parliament that we vote for, we can change rules and laws governing trade, but they're unhappy about that, but are wonderfully enthusiastic about a trade deal with America where we have none of that say. And yet they're worried about losing sovereignty to the EU. Anyway, back to the article. So Boris Johnson has made a clear choice to pursue a low-access, high-freedom form of Brexit, a trade relationship analogous to the one that Canada has, rather than the low-freedom, high-access trade deal that Norway has. But the big division is that the European Union's member states think that the UK needs to pay a greater regulatory price than Canada. And it's true, we are a closer country than Canada. This has been said many times before. Again, people don't believe me when you bring this up from experts. This trade-off won't go away if we opted for the Norway-style Brexit. While Norway, like the UK, is on the EU's immediate borders, it is a significantly smaller country. Whatever form of trade deal the UK wants, it will end up having to sacrifice more sovereignty than it equivalates because it is larger than the other economies nearest to the EU, and the nearer and the other mid-sized economies that have struck trade deals with the EU. You can make as many arguments as you like about the fairness of this, but ultimately, it's international trade negotiations for you. You decide whether the price that the bigger bloc offer is worth paying you or not. What matters in trade is the size of your market. That's why the US, China, and the EU get to dictate terms that they negotiate with smaller countries, and indeed with corporations. Talking about whether the EU's requirement that the UK signs up to a deeper level of regulatory alignment than Canada to get the same level of market access is fair is a bit like talking about whether a hotel charging you separately for Wi-Fi is fair. You can have as many arguments as you want, but the question that really matters is, can you live without Wi-Fi or can't you? The government knows this full well. What's interesting about the use of their social media channels for public events and to argue about the fairness isn't that they aren't arguments designed to persuade the EU. Their arguments are designed to win support here in the UK should the talks end in failure. Yeah. So, and I 100% agree with that. I think we are seeing a government that has realised that it has promised too much to too many people and it can't deliver. The promises that Brexiteers made cannot be delivered on in the slightest. And already they're starting to panic that they might have oversold Brexit. So now they've got to start to climb it down. They've got to scale back the features. All these type of stuff. And Downing Street doing this is not surprising. We've said it from the very start of this whole process. The EU is infinitely bigger than the UK market itself. Infinitely. We need them more than the EU needs us. That's a cold hard fact, despite what Brexiteers are saying about it being the other way around. They are our closest trading partner. We do more trade with Europe than any other country in the world. That, even in a post-Brexit world, won't change. The problem is the cost of doing business to Europe will change. It will increase. And that is where you get problems. That is where the knock-on effect comes on. If a business is doing, business with Europe and it lives in the UK, then its costs are going to go up. So it might have to find corners to cut elsewhere, maybe on staff. You start to see the problems that emerge, and then the business has another interesting conundrum. What if they do so much business with Europe that it's not worth staying in the UK? And that's a valid argument that many UK businesses are talking about at a director level, level in the UK in their business. That is a potential that we are looking at. This idea that businesses are asking for clarity. Brexiteers are like, you don't understand. Once they get clarity, everything will be fine. It'll be fine. Once they have clarity and they know what's going to happen, then they'll move. If it is not worth staying in the UK, they will move. And then you might say, what about the UK domestic market? They'll just trade into the UK from Europe. That is what will happen. You've then got other things in the UK itself where it would be more expensive to bring stuff in to Europe, many people might say, oh, well, won't that be good for the domestic market? Maybe not necessarily, because you could see a situation of where, well, what we have right now, the UK in Europe is one of the most unproductive in terms of production in Europe. Um, you've got a case of people in France, Germany, all the European countries. If from about October to December they decided to just stop manufacturing, we would still be having to catch up. And even by the end of like December, the UK production will have still not have caught up to the level of the European production. That is something that we are going to have to try and fix, and that is not something that the government itself can really have an answer to. It can certainly try investing and things like that, which is certainly something it can try and do, but that is down to businesses themselves, and it generally comes down to investment and technology. And if that question of, is it too expensive to invest in that technology and maybe that training and all that stuff, and hey, it's cheaper to move to Europe, maybe we'll take a 5-year hit, but in the long term our business will be better. Yeah, so I fully expect to start seeing clashes. I think now more and more, whereas you've got more of the you had the guy phoning into Farage. I heavily encourage people to phone into Farage. Someone asked me, I think, on another video, that I should do it. I've already phoned in. I phoned in not long after the 2016 vote. I've always tried to find it, and I know that I will always remember I was like the last guy to phone in on the show. But I've never been able to remember or when I exactly did it, which is annoying me. But I know I did it in 2016 because I did it after the vote. And yeah, I talked to Farage and I said, look, my town gets all this investment from the EU. Where does that investment come from? And he had no answer. And he still doesn't have any answers to the people that phone in and will ask those similar questions. But that's what Brexit was all about. It was a massive con job based on an ideological driving that just won't work anymore. The EU will dictate terms, and we've got to either like it or not. And I think that's what Boris knows, and I think that's what they are preparing to essentially go, oh, we tried our best, but that crafty EU will just have to settle for their terms, because otherwise we'll inflict massive damage on the UK economy. And that's the Brexit you've got. Jog on, lads. Brexit's done. And that'll be it. I think that will essentially be it.